In this first module, David will be discussing privacy. He will touch on issues such as privacy is learned, the invasion of privacy can be subtle, privacy is a mental health issue, and the application of privacy is a social skill.
Okay. The workshop we're going to be doing this morning is called The Ethics of Touch. And before I get into looking at the touch relationship that we have with our clients, I would like to begin with us discussing just for a moment the whole issue of privacy. Because as far as I'm concerned, privacy in human services is one of the least most understood concepts because of how we do our job. Now there's number one right off the top. I want us to remember something of fundamental importance, and that is privacy is learned. You have to understand that you and I, we grew up in a different world than many people with developmental disabilities did, and from a very young age we had our privacy and our rights to privacy not only respected but encouraged by our family grouping, because our family groups are aware that our understanding of privacy is fundamental to keeping ourselves safe and sane in a world that can be somewhat dangerous. But for people with disabilities, I think somehow we can forget, because privacy is such an ingrained part of who we are, we can forget that that may not be true for somebody who's lived vastly different lifestyles than you and I. One of the jobs that I have is in placement breakdown. And what I do is, if a person with a disability has moved from an institution and into a community setting and had a mammoth breakdown in the area of sexuality, I'm often called in to come up with a transition plan to get them back to the community. Here is a man who had lived in an institution for his entire life and had moved to a co-ed group home in a community. And you and I know how they do this. They do this like they believe that community mores and values pop into somebody's head on the bus ride from the institution. So here he is now in the institution, in the group home, with absolutely no training about what it is to live in the community and what the community mores are. Now, within 2 to 3 days, this guy is a rapist, he is an exhibitionist, and he is a dangerous sexual criminal. He turns into a dangerous sexual criminal in 2 days in community services. So fine. I meet him back in the ward, where he is back again in the institution. Now, when I go into the ward, the first thing that I notice is the ward that he has lived for some 30 years is an all-male ward. Now let's make it perfectly clear. Privacy rules on all-male environments or all-female environments are very different than they are in co-ed environments. So his entire living history has been one in when there's all males around him. Let's take a look at other privacy issues for him. The bedroom, if you could actually really call it a bedroom, was a room probably about this side with 30 beds in it, and they were all in a row. So he was very used to getting ready for bed, getting up from bed, getting dressed and getting undressed, while being in a very public forum with 60 other eyes at least seeing him in states of dress and undress. You need to understand the idea of privacy and nudity have been taken away from him just from the place that he lives. Let's go into the bathroom. In the bathroom where he lives, some many years ago, a person with a developmental disability used too much toilet paper and flushed it into the toilet, and the toilet flooded. Now, the response from the staff of the institution was not to do training, but to simply do monitoring. They took down all of the stalls in the bathroom, leaving bare toilets along in a row, and staff, primarily female, would stand at the door and watch the men defecate and urinate just to ensure that they weren't going to cause any inappropriate plumbing problems. Now, what about showering? The showering was done in a large room, and there was a great big mirror on the sort of one of those concave mirrors right in the corner, so that the staff could sit and watch the men in this environment. Now, a number of things are occurring. Defecation, urination, dress, undress, all of those kinds of privacy issues, which would be very uncomfortable for us to be living there, was just a commonplace for him. Now let's take a look at the gender issue. Almost all the staff on the ward were female. All of the residents were male. So he understood something very clearly, that in front of women, it's okay to be naked. That's absolutely acceptable. Not okay for women to be naked in front of him. Now, he moves into a community group home, and as I've said, nobody takes into consideration the culture that he has lived in. He is somehow supposed to just absorb it in through his skin. This is what happens. For the first couple of days at the group home, he's okay. He has trouble with his bedroom, and the reason he has trouble with his bedroom is it's a one-person bedroom. And for him, in his entire life, a one-person place has been timeout room. So he thought he was in punishment when he was in his bedroom, and they had to sort of desensitize him to the smallness of the room. Once they got past that, He got up one morning. He left the bedroom. Remember, bedrooms mean nothing to him. He walked into the bedroom of another human being. Remember, bedrooms mean nothing to him. In bed, in that room, was a young woman with a developmental disability. He had never in his life been around another person who was like him, who was a woman. Never. All of the women he had ever known were powerful women who were staff. He wants to know what she looks like. So what does he do? He reaches down and grabs her bed sheets, yanks it back, and grabs her nightclothes and yanks them up. Now this woman wakes up and is very aware that her privacy has been violated and screams blue bloody murder. Staff arrive. Now what do they see? They see a man with a developmental disability towering over a woman in bed, exposed and screaming, okay? And as they report, and they have to report because they were shocked by the sight, he had an erection at the time. Therefore, he must be a rapist. Now, women, there's something you really need to know about the male body, okay? And that is, you know that erection that we have in the morning? It's not because you're at your most alluring, okay? It's because we've got to pee, okay? I know we lie to you about it, but it's because we've got to pee here. Now what happens? This man is back in the institution, and he is labeled as a sex offender because people for a second didn't think that maybe we need to learn and teach privacy. Maybe this is a fundamental for you and I to live well together in the community and for the genders to do well together should they ever actually get together. So number one off the top, even though you believe, I think, that privacy is inherent to the human condition, it is not. Privacy is something that is learned through living your life in a culture that has respected privacy.
Pause the tape and respond to the following. What privacy issues do you see for the people you support?
Number two, caregivers. This is you and I. We don't get privacy. We don't get privacy at all. I want you to picture this meeting, okay? There's myself as the behavior therapist and / sex consultant. We have the parents, we have the leisure people, we have the vocational people, we have the residential people. They're all around the table. A lot of government dollars, okay, are around that table with a young woman who's 18 years old, okay? Now, we go through the various domains of her life, and we talk of the kinds of things that she's achieved, the things that we need to work on, the kinds of things that we have to do over the course of time. Then we get to hygiene issues. And there, we, all of us professionals and parents, in front of an 18-year-old girl, begin to discuss her difficulty with menstrual hygiene and tampons. Now, I got to ask you, isn't this a bizarre picture? And I became very uncomfortable, and I was wanting to bring this up at the meeting, and I brought up at the meeting that I thought it was a little bit inappropriate for all of us around that table to be talking about this woman's menstrual hygiene issues. And here's what they said to me. Oh, she doesn't mind. Now you have to get this very clearly. The fact that she doesn't mind is the problem. The fact that she is so used to having her privacy violated, so used to being humiliated by common practice that she doesn't mind, and you know what? Find any other 18-year-old woman in this society and bring her into a meeting and discuss her menstrual hygiene in front of a group of people, and find me one that wouldn't stand up and say, this is offensive, this is embarrassing, how dare you do that to me? Find me one. But the fact that a woman with a developmental disability is so used to the casual invasion of her privacy that she will simply let it go without without any kind of protest is the problem. So we don't get this. And I have to tell you, I don't think this is just human services. I think any profession that works with other human beings, where we're regularly in spaces where other people aren't, it happens too. I noticed the last time that I went to the hospital, and I had to have x-rays. I'll never forget this. I went into that little booth, you know, when you have to pull that curtain, all right? And they give me this blue gown. Is it blue in New York too? I mean, where do they make this stuff, okay? So they give me this blue gown. So I take my clothes off and I put the blue gown on. Now, on you, it's a gown. okay? On me, it's a bib, okay? It came to about here, and I'm like, no way in hell am I going to walk out of this little booth and down the hallway for an x-ray, okay? Now, it seemed to me, from having dealt with the nurses, that the gown was really important to the nurses, okay? So I put on my jeans, okay, to wear, and I'll keep the gown on. It seems to make me happy. I come out of there wearing my jeans and the gown, and they send me back in to take my jeans on. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do this. Look at me. If I wear but just this little gown here, it'll leave my family jewels exposed. Now, my family jewels won't buy very much, but they're mine. I don't want everybody else to know how cheap God was. I mean, I'm simply not going to do this, okay? Now, I am now a problem patient, okay? However, they placate me. So I go all the way down into the x-ray, okay? Now I'm in the x-ray room and they make me take my pants off. This is to x-ray my lungs. I have to have my pants off. I don't understand it because I don't know about you, but I think lungs end about here, okay? I don't think mine go any further, okay? So I do it, okay, just to keep them happy. So you lie down on that x-ray thing, right? Well, you know that gown? It's now a halter top. It's up to about here, okay? And I'm lying there, and this woman, the x-ray technician, is talking to me like I'm not lying naked on this table with my chest covered. And then into the x-ray room comes a friend of hers. They stand beside me, naked on this table, and they begin to talk about where they're going for lunch. If they had mentioned hot dogs, I would have run screaming from the room, okay? But you know what? I want it to be very clear. I don't think that they are bad people, and I don't think that we are bad people. I think we have become acclimatized to being in private areas with people. I think we have forgotten that inside those bodies are real human beings that have a real desperate need for privacy. That's where
Pause the tape and respond to the following. Where do you see subtle invasions of privacy in the work you do? Please list.
The third point, I want you to realize something, and I say this every time I lecture on sexuality. Privacy is a mental health issue more than it is a sexual issue. Way more. Let me ask you a question. If I was to take away all of your privacy time, okay, with the exception of the time that you could have sex. So you can have sex just as much as you normally do. However, all the rest of your privacy has just disappeared. If I did that to you, would I decrease the quality of your life? Yeah, sure I would, okay? It's really important for us to recognize that. We desperately need privacy. And more than that, we build privacy into our lives at all sorts of times when we need that. How many people here are in the room with their supervisors presently? Okay, supervisors do not look at your staff. Staff do not look at your supervisor. How many of you have ever, say, if you work in a group home or in a group environment with people with disabilities, how many of you have ever, got into the bathroom, closed the door, collapsed against the wall, and stood there for about 5 minutes doing absolutely nothing? Anybody ever done that? How many of you supervisors have ever gone into your office and said to the secretary, hey, I got a really important report that I got to work on here, so could you hold my calls? And then got into your office and closed the door and sat behind your desk and done absolutely nothing. You might as well admit it, that's all your staff think you do anyway. Now, does this make you a bad staff? Of course not. What you are simply doing is building little moments of privacy into your life so you can reduce the demands and just be by yourself, gather your thoughts so that you can go back out there and cope with that. Do you know what just amazes me? When people with developmental disabilities try to do exactly the same thing, we call that off-task behavior, and it pisses us off. I mean, I was called into this workshop, and they were saying to me, and I'm quoting here, that, you know, John, he goes to the bathroom at least 4 times a morning, and we know he doesn't have to. Well, firstly, how did you get so well acquainted with this man's bladder? I have no idea. But more than that, why do you care about this as an issue? Why do you care about this? He goes in there, he stays there for 5 minutes, he comes back, he goes to work. What's the issue? Well, he doesn't have to go. He's just wasting time. This is off-task behavior. Well, how many times do you go off task? And people never seem to get it. It's okay for us to go off task. It's okay for us to take little breaks in our day. When a person with a disability does it, it becomes a real problem. And one of the things you read, which I think is kind of terrifying, As you know, all the literature says that the mental health issues of people with disabilities are absolutely enormous. I think this is one of the reasons why, that the whole issue of privacy has never been respected and has never been allowed. They just don't have those kinds of places to which they can retreat and repair over the course of time.
Pause the tape and respond to the following. How do you build in your moments of privacy?
All right, the last thing that I want to take a look at is that privacy is a social skill. Okay, the understanding and the application of privacy principles is a social skill. Now, where do we learn our social skills? We learn our social skills in relationships to other human beings. Let me tell you a terrifying story. Here's a man with a developmental disability, never had a problem in a community. He has never done anything inappropriate. He has followed almost all the social rules. Now, it's his birthday today, and it's a wonderful birthday because his parents sent him some money. And it's just enough money for him to buy a watch that he has really wanted to buy, that he has stood for hours in a store in the mall looking at this watch. He knows the money in his parents' gift is enough for him to buy the watch. He is completely able to go around in the community, so he does. Gets on the bus, he goes to the mall. Staff are thrilled for him. They're really thrilled for him. They know he really wants this watch. Now he has the money to buy. So what happens? He's going to use a social rule, okay? And let me demonstrate that social rule. Nicole, could you come up here, please? How many of you work with people with disabilities who they stand too close, they come too close into your spaces, they put their face into yours? Now, isn't it very interesting that that causes us concern? Do you like it when people with disabilities stand too close and stick their face in yours? No, of course not. And I want you to stay with the fact that you don't like it. And I'm going to suggest to you that there's a reason why people with disabilities use that particular skill. What behaviors do we perform if we want to talk to a person with disability about something that's tremendously important? I am willing to bet that this is what we do. We put our hand on their shoulders and we stick our face in and say, okay, we need to talk about this. Okay, Nicole, now are you paying attention right now? Okay. Now, what is Nicole learning? Tell me what she's learning. How to get attention, but more than that. If it's important, no, not just get really, notice what I did. If it's important, touch, pull, stick, okay? If it's important, there are a certain set of behaviors that I perform to do that. The interesting thing is, do you know what? We always notice when they violate our boundaries, but we never notice when we violate theirs. So here's Nicole for her entire life. When somebody has had something important to say, they touch, they stick their face, and they talk. Now, here's a man. He has gone to the mall, okay? He has a strategy, doesn't he, for if he has something important to say. Well, he doesn't think he's going to have to use it because he sees himself now as a customer. He's standing at the counter where the watch is, okay? Now, what do you think the staff are seeing when they're seeing this man who has stood there for weeks looking at this watch? What do you think they're seeing? And be blunt. What do you think? That he's just a retarded guy standing and looking at the thing. Well, you see, they don't see that today he's different. He's a customer, okay? Now, he knows he's different today. So he's waiting by the watch, and no one's coming. No one's paying any attention to him. Anxiety is building in him because he has something tremendously important to say. He's excited, all right? Now, there is a female staff who was working maybe 30 feet away from him with her back to him. Now, he has a skill for getting someone's attention when it's important. And what is it? Grab, turn, stick, talk, okay? Very simple social skill. What does he do? He approaches this woman from the back. She does not see him coming. He puts his hand on her shoulder to twirl her around. He sticks his face into hers and begins to talk animatedly about the watch. She does not hear the watch. Why doesn't she hear the watch? Because look at it from her perspective. And I'm using language from her perspective, not language that I would use. Here we have a great big tall man who is clearly mentally retarded, who is in her store, who has just grabbed her, who has just spun her around and has stuck his face into her and talking. What is she going to do? Is she going to listen to figure out what's going on? No. She panics. She begins to scream. The moment she begins to scream, he feels terrible because he realized he frightened her. So he grabs her, and when he grabs her by the arms, his thumbs touched her breasts, okay? He begins to shake her to try to settle her down so that she can hear he wants to buy a watch. Now what happens? There's a big man with a developmental disability shaking this woman in the store, touching her genitals, and wow, everybody comes from every direction. He does not have a watch. He is arrested, and he is jailed. And to me, this is a tragic circumstance here, and one that we should have been able to predict because, of course, he didn't learn the right rules for privacy, for social skills, for how to access other people's attention. The trouble was, he did what we do, and that got him in really big trouble.
Pause the tape and review the 4 aspects of privacy just discussed. Privacy is learned. The invasion of privacy can be subtle. Privacy is a mental health issue. And the application of privacy is a social skill. This section will address touch, affection, and relationships.
And I want you to imagine here that Nicole is a woman with a developmental disability whose skills are very low, okay? And I want you to imagine that I am now working in the group home that she's going to be in. And, you know, I get the job in the group home because I answer yes to the 2 questions. You know what they are. Number 1, do you believe in normalization? Number 2, will you work for practically no pay? So now, I've got the job, and let's be honest here, okay? I do the interview, and my first couple of shifts, I'm spending time with the other powerful people in the environments, okay? I'm not spending a lot of time with her. And by the way, it's very important for you and the viewers at home that this is gender non-specific. We could be men, we could be women, we could be male, female, reversed, okay? What's going to happen? Maybe second shift or third shift, somebody's going to say, Dave, it's Nicole's bathing night. Would you mind taking her through her bathing routine, please?
Pause the tape and respond to the following. What may be wrong with this scenario described in the video?
So I'm going to go into that bathroom, and what is going to happen? I am going to see her completely and totally naked, okay? Without any consent, without any way of getting consent, without ever asking her permission. I am simply going to go in and provide an intimate care to her because I have that right, because I did an interview and someone gave me a job. Now let's take a look at the number of people who are going to provide Nicole with intimate care over a 1-year period. Now I don't know what the staff turnover rate is here in New York City, but the staff turnover rate in Toronto is Thursday, okay? So that means that we could have upwards of 120 people providing intimate care to one person with a disability in the course of a year. That means we're taking into consideration what? The people who, you know, if you're off sick and you call somebody in, and most agencies have on-call lists that they can call people from this agency and borrow from here and there and so forth. So that means 120 people are going to come in and do intimate care with her. What is she learning about her body? And this is of fundamental importance. She is learning that her body is absolutely public, that absolutely anybody can see it. So when she walks out of the group home and she hasn't done her blouse up correctly, we say, cover that up. Don't you understand that's private? Of course not. Everybody gets to see me anyway. You know, all this work that we do in abuse prevention really kind of bothers me because we sort of talk about people with disabilities having right that nobody can touch their body without their permission. Excuse me, that's second step, okay? Nobody's allowed to see your body without permission, and that is completely taken away from her. I want you to understand that that very first and huge sort of sense of abuse prevention strategies for her has been taken away from her simply because of how we do do our job. More than that, every one of these has two problems. One is it makes her more victimizable, but boy, it also turns her into somebody seen as a sex pervert within the community, okay? Now, we have in our sexuality clinic referrals for men and women who are peeping toms and peeping tomettes, which is really interesting because we have almost for this behavior the same number of men and same number of women referred. Now let's go out from a logical perspective. If Nicole learns anybody can see my body, what's the corollary to that? I can see anybody else's. So would there be anything morally wrong with Nicole walking down the street, and it's nighttime now, and looking into somebody's house, there's action going on, it looks interesting for her to just go take a look? No, of course not. In her culture, it's okay for strangers to be seeing other strangers. For every one of these things that I'm going to do with you and present to you, there are the two sides to the coin. Number one, the person becomes more victimizable, an easy target, an easy victim. And number two, if they did it, they're going to be charged with some kind of sexual misbehavior. Now, let's take a look at touch. We know that the spine is very important in social interaction, okay? We're not allowed to cross somebody's spine without some kind of pre-agreement. Trust me, the only reason that Nicole is allowing me to cross her spine up here is because, number one, I asked her permission first. Number two, we have a very clear role. I'm presenting at a conference to which she is attending. And number three, there's like 40 people in this room here keeping her safe, okay? Trust me. If we're in another environment somewhere, a bar or something, and I'm doing this, she's probably not letting me, right?
Right.
She's simply not going to allow that to occur. So we know that the spine is very important in social interaction. We allow people into that space. And most of us feel either embraced or intruded upon, and very little in between when people make that kind of movement. Now, people with developmental disabilities, they have people cross their spines all the time. Let's step forward a second here. Let's imagine that I'm going to do some teaching with her. So I'm going to put my body this close to her, and I'm going to begin to move her this way. Now, if she shows some resistance, okay, let's say I'm wanting her to pick up a pot, and she's showing some resistance, and I push her hand towards that, okay, show some resistance. What am I going to do with that resistance? What am I going to meet it with? Force, okay? Because I'm going to assume that that resistance is born out of stupidity, not out of the fact that she doesn't want to be touched in this way and manipulated. So I'm going to force her to do that. Now, this may be one of the most important concepts you're going to learn today. What is she learning? Let me tell you. She is learning that there is no correlation between social distance and social relationship. No correlation. Absolutely anybody can come this close to you and manipulate your body. And again, without consent, without permission, without even considering that that was necessary to do. Now what happens? Nicole's in a mall. She sees somebody who looks friendly. Now you have to understand, the idea of stranger is bizarre to people with disabilities, because strangers are simply staff I haven't met yet, okay? Because total strangers walk into my house and provide me service, okay? So she sees somebody who simply looks friendly, and she's going to go up there and go, hi. And they're going to think, oh, what a friendly, retarded woman. However, if she's a man, she's going to be charged with sexual assault. So we have to take a look at what is it that we're doing here when we come into that kind of space. So let's go back to who you and I are. Well, no, let's start here. Let's start talking a little bit about body privacy, and then let's go to the circle of privacy around the body. What I did was spend some time looking at how human beings touch one another, okay? Because boy, have we lied to people with disabilities. Isn't it true that in most sex education curriculums that you learn there are 3 private zones of your body? This is a private part of your body, this is a private part of your body, and this is a private part of your body, correct? Okay. If that's true, what does that make the rest of the body? Well, let's put it another way. Let's call it public, okay? Now, let's take a look at your body here. If it was a man with a developmental disability and I'd learned there are only 3 private parts of the body, I will not do any of this to you. Would it be okay for me as an instructor in an academic forum, even with her permission to come up here, to touch her upper leg? No. What about her stomach? What about her lower back? I would never do that. Isn't it true that all of the body is private and becomes public under certain circumstances? I want to tell you a story. I am an absolute fan of sex education, okay? I think sex education is a wonderful thing. However, I don't think that we think necessarily before we teach about some of these concepts. Here we have a man with a developmental disability who's out in the community. He's never had any kind of social skills mistake, and he's done everything right. I mean, this guy came from the institution, he moved to a group home, now he's in an apartment of his own, and he's competitively employed. I mean, he's one of those really big success stories that we really like to talk about. Now, the worker that was working with him noticed that he'd never had sex education. Now, she thinks that this is important, and I agree. So he goes off to a sex education course, and this is what he learns. There are 3 private zones on a woman's body. And he's like, wow, that's pretty cool. He's very glad he came to sex education. When he graduates from sex education, it is only a week or so later, he's on the Toronto Transit System. He's sitting on the bus. There is 1 seat left open on the bus, and it happens to be sitting next to him. Now, a woman gets on the bus. We are told by the police later on that it's summertime, and she's wearing a very short skirt, okay? Now, she comes and sits down next to him. He takes a look at those legs. He goes back to sex education. There are 3 private parts on a woman's body. And he's, So he puts his hand on her knee, slides it up, but stops before touching her groin. Now, the unfortunate part of the story is that this woman hadn't recently taken sex education, so she wasn't aware that he had only touched a public part of her body. So she panics, okay? She pushes the little panic strip on the bus. It comes careening over. The police are involved. And I wish you could have been in court later just to have seen this and the results of poor teaching. He sat on that stand and said, I didn't touch a private part of her body. I didn't. I just touched her leg. He had absolutely come to trust us because we hadn't taught the truth. Well, what is the truth about the body? As I've said, all of the body is private and becomes public under certain circumstances. Well, where are we allowed to touch one another? Well, the rules are very, very strict. We know that shoulder down to elbow, the outer perimeter of their body, that's pretty touchable, okay? Elbow down to wrist is interesting. It's perfectly acceptable for me to do this because Nicole is wearing something long-sleeved. If she was wearing something short-sleeved and I was chatting with her and I was touching her skin versus the cloth, even if she never really knew what the rules of touch was, she'd be a little bit uncomfortable about why I was doing that. Now, major gender difference here, shoulder to neck, okay? Almost all women report feeling intruded upon when men put their hands on their shoulder. Almost no men report being intruded upon when either men or women touch the shoulder. So the shoulder does seem to be a gender difference. Let me ask you, what about the hands? Are hands public or private? Well, that's an interesting one. We don't touch hands. We touch palms, and we do it under certain circumstances. And it's very, very clear what those rules are. So what I'd like to do is a couple of things. Firstly, can you turn and face me and back on up? Just back on up a little bit. I'm going to walk up to you, okay? And I want you to pretend that you've never seen me before in your life, okay? And I'm just heading at you. So I want you to tell me to stop when you feel uncomfortable with my presence, okay? Okay, this is always a very, very difficult exercise for me to do because you'll notice that my feet are about 6 feet away from me and my stomach about 5. So I'm not really sure where your boundaries are. But I want you to put your hands to the side. I am going to violate this space, okay? I will not touch you, but I'm going to come very close to you, okay? Don't lean. Do you feel uncomfortable?
Yes.
Do you feel uncomfortable for her? Okay. Now take a look at what's happening here. You know, for her, she has what's called the doe in the woods phenomenon. I think this is the nicest named of all the psychological phenomenon. And you know, from, what is it? 5 feet 11 inches away, when I come into her space, and everybody here in the audience has had this phenomenon, right? Somebody comes just a little bit too close, and they're not even at you yet, and you become alert and aware and look for avenues of escape. Doe in the woods phenomenon. Now Nicole here has it from 5 feet 11 inches away because she is a woman without a disability.
Pause the tape and complete the following exercise. Brainstorm. Why do people with disabilities have a reduced sense of boundaries?
Because of our constant intrusion into space, because of our constant way of touching, do you have to understand? She has no circle. The reason why we are so comfortable with them coming into our space is we have one, they don't. They are coming to their comfort level into our comfort level, and we become uncomfortable. You also have to be aware for Nicole that for her, her circle is her skin. She cannot prepare herself for any assault or any escape until sexual abuse actually occurs, because we have taken that away from her. So we need to take a look at how we're doing that with her and how we're doing our teaching regarding all of this. Now, before I begin, I want to demonstrate for you the difference between appropriate and inappropriate touch. May I?
Yes.
You saw me get consent. All right. I want you to pretend that Nicole and I are two non-disabled people standing at a bus stop, okay? Now, I'm a social servant, so that means I got a meeting to get to, and I'm concerned, okay? So fine. I don't know what time the bus is coming, so I say, excuse me, could you tell me what time the next bus is coming? That is so appropriate. I said something contextual to the environment that we're in. I touched her on a relatively public part of her body. And you know what? I'm willing to bet 5 minutes from now when she's on the bus, okay, she doesn't remember being touched. 10 minutes from now, she won't remember me at all. Compare. Excuse me, could you tell me what time the next bus is coming too? Excuse me, can you tell me what time the next bus is coming? Did you feel a difference between those?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you did. Okay. I'm glad. You know what? She can feel that discrimination. Many people with disabilities can't, because for some reason we have come into this space so much with them. So we need to take a look at what we've done, what we've created, and begin to answer some very difficult questions like, why are 80% of women with developmental disabilities sexually molested or raped by adulthood by us? Why? Why 60% of men? So we need to take a look at how we do our services.
Pause the tape and respond to the following. What are some of the things that happen now where you work that may be considered violations of body privacy? Please list. What practice guidelines would you suggest to support body privacy?
Since we're so concerned about touch, how do you feel about hugging people when people like to be hugged?
Pause the tape and answer the question, is it okay to hug people with disabilities if you're a staff member? Why or why not?
Let me tell you, we have a rule. It is never appropriate under any circumstance for a staff to bear hug a person with a disability, to pull their body into your body such that it is layered, separated by only 2 layers of clothing. It is absolutely never appropriate.
Do you agree with this statement? Why or why not?
One of the things that we notice is that people with disabilities need affection too. And oftentimes the staff in their lives are the only persons for now, and we're going to go to that for now, that are providing that kind of emotional closeness. So if we are going to do any kind of physical touch and demonstration of affection, there's got to be some rules about how we do this. Firstly, we will do it this way. A cross body like this, okay? So that my hand here is touching the outer perimeter of her body here, and that my side is touching her here. If we were turned around and she was attempting to hug me, okay, and I'm much bigger than her, and if she couldn't get all the way around, let me tell you, this hand never goes under the arm, never. Okay? If you can't reach all the way around the body, you go up to shoulder, you do not go under the arm. That's of fundamental importance, okay? So we're going to make it brief. Thanks for helping out with the dishes, I appreciate it. And contextual, okay? It's quick and it's contextual. I'm teaching her what the context is so that she learns this is when you hug other people and this is when it's okay. These are the kinds of circumstances under which it's okay to hug.
Pause the tape and respond to the following. Why should affection and touch be brief and contextual? List reasons.
One of the most important things I ever learned about people with developmental disabilities, and I get in trouble for saying this because you say, can't say that all about all people with disabilities. No, but you can say this about most people with disabilities. Most people with developmental disabilities have difficulty reading a social fabric. And that's an important thing to remember. And that's why we have so many of the social skills problems that we have, okay? Now, what that means is that if I just go up and give her a hug at the sink after the dishes are done, and I say nothing, I'm going to leave it to her, given her disability, giving her difficulty with reading social fabric, for picking up the fact that what I did was related to the dishes, okay? And she may well not. And if it's not related to the dishes, it's probably related to relationship. I don't want that mistake, okay? I want to make it very clear what it is that I did here and that she understands the context and the motives for my touch. That's for her. Why is it important that I say out loud what I'm doing for me?
Just to cover yourself, just to make sure that everyone understands that it's not an infection hug.
Absolutely. What I want to have happen here is that if somebody comes in and sees me as a man hugging a woman with a disability in the kitchen, and this is my supervisor, I want them to know what happened. I want them to know what caused that touch, what brought our bodies into connection with one another, because that's really important. And I'll tell you this, supervisors who are here in the room, if you walk into a room and you see a staff hugging or in close contact with another human being with a disability, and you aren't asking questions, you're not doing your job. It is fundamental that you always ask those kinds of questions. And women, at this point I saw some women sort of lift themselves out of this. Well, that's a male-female issue. It is not. You need to be aware we have more abuse done by female staff towards people with disabilities in this field than done by female professionals in any other field. Okay, so this is something that's important both for the male and female in terms of how we do this.
In summary, it is important to follow the 4 previously mentioned affection rules because they can teach the circumstances for appropriate touch, they identify what is happening, they make the motive understandable, and they protect staff from assumption.
What happens if a participant I'm working with at this time likes to hug?
Good question. One of the worst things that can happen when somebody comes to a training is that they go, oh my God, and then go home and change practice, okay? That can be really unfair. So if you're now working with a person with a disability who loves to hug absolutely everybody, I think we have to acknowledge something. Number one, we built the problem. It is not their problem. We structured and taught them to respond that way affectionately. So what our job is then is to slowly fade out one kind of affectionate interaction and replace it with another. So if you're working with somebody who's hugging right now, I would suggest, firstly, get all the staff together and get them to agree or none of this will work, okay? And then say, okay, number one, we're going to accept her hug 2 times out of 3. But 1 time in 3, we're going to say, hold on a second here. Let's do it this way today. And I promise you this, I know people with disabilities, and I know they will find even that rejecting, okay? So I'm going to suggest you stay there until they've come comfortable with that kind of touch. Once you're there, then you're going to go to 2 times in 3. And then you'll move to 3 times in 3 and be out. And that process can take up from 1.5 years to 2 years to slowly draw it out. And please don't ask me, well, how long should it be? No. For some clients, you know what? They go through it like that. You know, they're real comfortable with real fast. They've never liked being touched in the first place. Other ones take a longer period of time for us to get out. And it really needs to be done based on the individual. But let me tell you what happens. Let's imagine here that Nicole is a woman who's been one of our programs who's gone through this. Now we hire a staff on, okay, who comes to give her a great big hug because they haven't been through this training. What do you think her first response is? We were anticipating that what she would do is just go back to the hugging behavior. Interestingly, that never happened. What it was somebody would pull back and say, that new staff touches me all the time. Isn't that great that people with disabilities are coming to recognize first intrusion and reporting first intrusion and discomfort around that rather than waiting to the assault? There was a question over there, please. Free for all, let's talk about affection for a while. Yes?
Nowadays, more and more care providers are going to the homes.
Yes.
And I've noticed that there are no boundaries set between the disabled person and the family member.
Uh-huh.
You have discussed so far training staff to teach participants about privacy.
Yes.
But I find it very difficult to teach families.
It is.
How can we deal with that?
Well, firstly, if I'm going to do family training, okay, let's sort of imagine now that this is an audience of parents, okay? One of the things that I think it's really important for us to do is get some almost a bit of normalcy into how people with disabilities grow, okay? One of the most important books I ever read was a book called Psychology of Human Sexuality by a woman named Janet Shibley Hyde. And what I love about this book is it begins at birth and goes to death and talks about the various things that we need to learn along the way. So I started to take a look at some of these issues. Let's take a look at your own children, okay? At what age do your kids first demonstrate an understanding of body modesty, okay? They don't want you in the bedroom with them anymore. They don't want them in the bathroom or you know, if they're getting dressed, they want mom and dad out of the room. About what age does that start to occur? It's 4 to 5 years old, okay? So here's what we're saying to parents of kids with disabilities, okay? Around the age of 4 and 5, we got to start teaching body modesty. We really have to do this, because if they don't, they're going to make really big social skills mistakes. The most common social skill mistake that is in the area of, I don't understand why they call it, but sexuality, that we get referred from the school is little boys and little girls who pull their pants down and urinate in the schoolyard, okay? They see that as a sexual issue, okay? I see this as a boundaries issue, that the child has not yet learned that that's a private thing. So we need to teach body modesty to kids with disabilities around the age of 5 or 6. Okay, at what age do kids have relationships pat, okay? They understand that mom and dad are not related unless they're in certain parts of the United States. I've been there, trust me. Okay, that mom and dad are not related, that what a brother is, what a sister is, what an uncle is, and that probably the most difficult of all of them is fictive kin, okay? Which means that they call somebody Aunt Gladys, but they're not really their Aunt Gladys, they're their mom's best friend. At what age do kids have that solid? Oh no, it's older than that. When they got all of that, 6 or 7 in that age range, okay? So now, if they get it earlier, that's cool, okay? Averages mean some come a little earlier, some come a little late, but it's around that age range. Okay, but the next really big one that comes is social distance, okay? At what age do your kids not want you to sit so close to them anymore? They don't want to sit on your lap anymore. And Ma, if you have to say that you love me, could it be in the basement, in the dark, killing a chicken? I don't want this to happen. I don't want to know about it, okay? At what age do they want that sort of physical and emotional distance from you? This is a really hard one, and you're all guessing different ages, and you're all right, because it's just pre-puberty, and that really depends on the child. And one of the most important things that we know is that non-disabled children push these things. They push for the modesty, they push to learn about relationships, and they push you away. Often kids with developmental disabilities don't do that. So we end up with a person who's 42 years old still sitting on their mother's lap, still sitting on their father's lap. And we have to address that in some ways. So we do training around those kinds of things. However, the issue is you're the professional and you follow professional guidelines. You do not take your professional guidelines based on, well, this family wants me to hug their child, this family doesn't. That's not the issue here is. The issue is these are your guidelines for you as a professional and how you provide that service. Let's talk some more about affection. Yes?
Actually, my question kind of follows up on family when you talked about culture.
Yes.
Certainly there's also some differences in culture between whether the touch on a hand or arm is even still public or private space, or whether the hug is a natural part of what in my culture is like, yes, that's how I say hello, even if I've internalized the rules that in my culture women can say hello to each other that way, but a man should not.
Yes.
So how do we make those distinctions also for staff?
We teach to a conservative norm, okay, in terms of what's appropriate for people with disabilities to be engaging in out there. And we do that for a reason, okay? People with developmental disabilities are already suspect within our society. You open a group home and people say, oh, I don't know if I want a group home moving in my neighborhood because I'm worried about the safety of my children. They're saying, that statement is a saying that these people are going to hurt my children. There is already suspect for them. So we teach them very conservative rules, okay, for how they behave out there and what social distance is appropriate and not. When they're at home with their families, of course, they can do that because you know what? For the most part, that's what you and I do. Okay? That when we're in our own culture or when we're with our own friends, we follow a different social pattern than when we do in the typical public. But we've got to teach those rules because we're seeing people with disabilities going to jail with that. So let's talk some more about the affection-giving stuff. Imagine that you're a staff who would find it very offensive that you're not supposed to hug a person with a disability, and talk to me about that.
Well, actually, my question is being in the field and seeing staff touch participants inappropriately. That's how they think they're showing affection. Goes on all the time. How do you approach people and tell them that this is not appropriate without alienating people?
Well, and you see that how do we do? That's why we do these workshops, okay? For people to start thinking about it, because firstly, I think the field has made an enormous mistake bringing people into our field, giving them access to people with disabilities with absolutely no training as to what the boundaries are and what the professional rules of conduct are, okay? And what the staff are doing, they think that they're being wonderful and friendly and supportive and all those sorts of things. But what we want to make it very clear is that's not what happens here, and it's also not what your job is. So we have to go back to what is our job. And one of the things that people will say to me is, you know, gee, I don't know if I would want to live in a world where the only hug I got was this. How many of you, when I said that this is all we're going to be allowed to do, had that cross your mind? I mean, my God, would I want to live in that world? Then ask me about it, okay? Because that's what I want to talk about. I wouldn't want to live in that world either. And part of what I think we need to take a look at here is right now that this is all the only hug that she's getting, you need to be aware this isn't our only rule. Okay, how many of you have worked with some people, say, for 5-10 years? Okay, do you know what? Even for you, it's never more than this, okay? But what we will do is this. We want to make it very clear that because you've been with this person for 5 or 6 years, you have greater access to their body than you would. If I'm a brand new staff, I'm not allowed to hug her at all. Why should I be allowed to have the same access to her body as you do, and you've known her for 5 years? So the very maximum brand new staff who comes in can do with Nicole is, with her permission, touch her arm. Okay, that's an outer perimeter of her body. No more than that, and no more for at least 6 months. And it doesn't matter if Nicole changes the rules. It doesn't matter if after a couple of months she wants to give me a hug. No, I'm still a stranger. We don't know each other very well yet. We want staff to use that kind of language because you are a stranger, for heaven's sakes. And we want to get people with disabilities to understand that staff can be strangers. They're not automatically people that you trust because they walked in the door. Now, after maybe 6 months, okay, we could move to shoulder, okay? From shoulder, we can move to the other shoulder and across. And that's going to take up to 6 months, 8 months, a year, depending on her comfort and the supervisor's permission for you to become more intimate with the person you serve. Because we want her to understand people who know me better touch me more. People who know me less touch me less. I want her to make that kind of discrimination. And I want staff to begin to use that kind of language. Since I'm a stranger, I have very little access to you. One of the things that we look at here in terms of that, think about how bizarre human services is. And I saw a question which I'll go to in just a second. Do you realize that we will hire somebody today? I don't know if you guys do this, but we'll hire somebody today. They'll be in a person's home tomorrow providing intimate care in a bathroom. Okay? So I don't understand why we would give access to the bodies of people with disabilities when staff aren't through probation yet. I mean, we don't even know if we're going to keep them, and we're going to give them our most precious commodities in places where we get hurt, and then we go, gee, I wonder why so many people with disabilities are hurt. Well, it's because we're not respecting what's going on. We're not respecting the field, and we're not respecting people with disabilities. So, okay, I saw a hand up. Well, yes, please. Let's stay on affection for a while. Yes?
Yes, in our program, we have a participant who, hugs are a way of showing her that you care and love her.
Uh-huh.
She approached you for a hug and you say no, let's shake hands, or she'll stop coming to program until you call her and say, we really do care about you, but we couldn't hug you this week. There are a lot of guys who really depend, or they've learned to rely on a hug.
Absolutely.
That hug.
Oh, thank you. Well, firstly, I never, ever, 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 ever substitute a handshake for a hug. That's a big mistake. A handshake is a greeting skill, not an affection skill. Okay, so you got to stay within affection skills. Okay, so I never, because I don't think that may even make sense. Okay, and if you've heard me, I've said we slowly go out. And again, what you're getting to is they're relying on us for the affection. Here's something that a lot of people have some real trouble with. I want you to understand who you are to the people you serve. Number one, you aren't their friends. I am really sorry. You are not their friends. You are not there to meet emotional needs. You are not there to be the person who holds and cradles. You aren't there. That's not your job, okay? So if you're saying to me that, gee, this person is relying on a hug from you, you need to ask yourself a question. Why? Why does this person need a hug from me? And you know the answer to that question, because they ain't getting it anywhere else, okay? Because you know what? When I go to work, if my boss wanted to hug me, it would be like, get away from me. That's harassment. I wouldn't allow it to occur. Because you know what? I don't get my emotional needs met at work. Okay? Now, I understand the situation that you're in, and part of what I would really want to say to you is, be gentle about all this, okay? If they're needing that hug right now, there's two things you need to be thinking about, okay? Number one, let's slowly withdraw the hug to them, okay? And let's replace it with the side hug or the arm hug or whatever it is that you're going to do. Develop other affection-giving strategies that this person likes. And number two, say, okay, how do we build this so that this person gets a fair bit of affection in their lives from natural sources? Before we began the training and before we began to implement some of what I'm saying here, there wasn't one married couple with a developmental disability. Not one, okay? And do you know why not? Because all the staff were in there meeting all of these emotional needs of people with disabilities so that somehow we were able to lie to us ourselves, and certainly lie to people with disabilities about what was really going on here, okay? Once we started to do this, you're not their friends, and people got very angry at that idea that they're not their friends. Well, you know what? Let's examine the lie, okay? Nicole is a woman with a disability who lives in a group home, and there's a bunch of people around her who really care about her, but they're all labeled staff, okay? And you know what? You'll sit down and, boy, you know, she's really popular. She has a lot of friends. And then you draw the circles around her to determine who the friends are, and you discover that every single person that's in those circles that we're calling friends is also staff. And then we take all those staff out because we've now said staff aren't friends. What do we have to say? Nicole lives in isolation. She has no friends. This woman has been in human services for 20 years and she has no friends. We didn't do our job. We got caught up in meeting all those emotional needs without recognizing our job in human services is never to meet the emotional needs of our clients. Our job is to facilitate her getting her needs met in appropriate places. Not our job to do the otherwise. Since we are talking about friendship, I want to read you a poem that's written by a woman whose name is Carolyn Joyce Swartz. And Carolyn has worn a number of labels over the course of her life, including a variety of disabilities. And the poem is called Paid Friends. Where can I cry so I'll be heard? Who will listen to my word? I've paid so many ways to professionals on their business days, for their expertise, their fee, to buy a piece of love for me. I can no longer paid friends bear. I need one person who will be there, who will not stuff back in me my tears, and will not profit from my fears. I need someone to stay the night and not make money from my fright. I cannot pay them any more. I will not live my life a whore, for I would rather die than pay for friendship like I must today. That's a powerful poem from somebody who has been in our services, who realized that at the end of all of that time, all the friendship was a fee-for-service basis. And I think that that's a tragedy when somebody realizes that and puts it into that kind of perspectives. So I think it's important that we understand clearly what our role is. Our role is not to have to meet the affectional needs, but help those needs being met. Somebody asked me about, well, yeah, that might be easy for people who are higher functioning, but what about those people who have more severe handicaps? There's a number of things when we think about those people who have more severe handicaps, okay? Firstly, let's go back to some of the more difficult things. The greater the disability, the more likely the abuse, okay? And that's a really important thing to remember. So while we want to establish boundaries for all people with developmental disabilities, one could actually argue that the boundaries should be much more secure for people with disabilities who have greater disabilities. And you are right, and a lot of people get upset with what I'm about to say, but there is a fact, and the fact is that people with developmental disabilities who have significant disabilities, the greater the disability, the less likely it is that they are going to form sexual relationships with peers. I mean, that just is a given, all right? Maybe that'll change in the future, but for right now. So the question then becomes, what do we do? How do we meet some of those kinds of needs? Well, I've seen it done in two ways, okay? Firstly happened when I was down in the United States and I was giving a lecture at an institution for those with physical and developmental handicaps. And we were doing it in the big gymnasium there, primarily because it was a cheap place to do it, so we could keep the cost of the conference down. So at lunchtime, when we got up to leave, I was halfway down the hallway when I realized I'd left something back in the room. So I said, you guys go get the car and pull up the front and I'll go get what I need. So I went back into the conference room, picked up what I need, and then I'm in a hallway all by myself, okay? And I heard a sound that I would have recognized anywhere else in the world, but I didn't recognize there because it was so out of context. So I stood and I listened for a second, and you know what the sound was? Paws. Their paws of a dog coming around a corner. And when the dog came around the corner, it was an interesting thing to me because they had put so many paintings up in the walls of the institution to somehow make it more humane. No, it just looked like an institution with paintings on the walls, okay? Really didn't do anything. But the dog entering the hallway brought humanity with it. It was so strange. So I bent down to take a look at the dog. I love dogs. The dog sat immediately, very well-trained dog. Around the dog's collar was a plastic card, a plasticized card, with the dog's picture, the dog's name, and the words pet therapist. It was an employee card. So fine. I stood up then, and the dog then zipped down the hallway and deked into a room. Now, I have spent all morning here talking about we got to read this privacy rights of people with disabilities. Well, I didn't. I went down the hallway to take a look, and this is what I saw. I looked in the room, and there was a man with a very significant physical and developmental disabilities in a wheelchair, and very significant disability. Have you seen those folks in the wheelchair who've got the blue inserts into the wheelchair that sort of cradles around the body because of the body shape? That's the person in the wheelchair. So fine. Dog gets to the wheelchair, crawls up in the wheelchair, puts one paw here, twists its body over, and hovers without touching the person in the wheelchair. And I thought that was so weird. I could also tell that it must be painful for the dog because the musculature of the dog, you know, was quite thin. I could see that this was an unnatural position for the dog to stand. But you know what the dog was doing? Therapy. The dog was waiting for this hand with incredible effort to push out, to come around the dog and come back at it. And the moment this hand touched that dog, the dog collapsed on the wheelchair, rolled all over him, licked him all over his face, and he was giggling and laughing. And I'll tell you, there was more love in that room at that moment than I've seen in many families in an entire year. And what I really honor there was they saw somebody who really needed to be close. And one of the things to remember when we talk about all this stuff, that the need and drive for intimacy is greater than the need and drive for sex. That's a really important thing to recognize. And one of the tragedies in human services is that we have, for all people with disabilities, been so afraid of them being sexual, we have also taken away intimacy needs from them. And I'll tell you this, I can live my life without sex, God knows, okay? However, to go even a month without intimacy, without feeling closeness, without that kind of tone, and do you know what? Another reason why I think there is so much mental illness in the population of people with disabilities. We have been so afraid of sex, we have locked them out of intimacy as well. And here we have an institution which we're all supposed to hate, and they said, the people in this institution have a need for intimacy, a need for closeness, a need to get up to and be rubbed and licked and stuff, and let's find an appropriate way for that to occur. I thought that that was absolutely brilliant. Second thing I want to say about pets. I mean, I work in agencies that have no pet policies. As far as I'm concerned, you got a no pet policy, you have an administration with way too much time on their hands. What do you mean a no pet policy? But anyways, I went to a group home, and this was such a cool story. I went to a group home, and they have a dog. You guys know what Newfoundland dogs are? Big dogs, okay, great big dog. So I go in there, and Laura, this is such the greatest dog. Loves everybody, but particularly the residents in the home. And one of the things they've noticed since Laura has come to the home, staff turnover causes practically no trauma. Do you know why? There's this big, furry heart, you know, that walks around and is in relationship to all the people who are there and who is stable. That's kind of cool. Now, Laura knows that I like dogs. So I always put a dog treat in this pocket when I go to the house, and Laura always comes up and sniffs my pocket to give the treat and so forth. Well, I was asked to go to this very group home to do a session on communicating with the disabled. Okay, so fine. So I arrived there. The issue is all the people in the group home are nonverbal, all right? So I sit around the table, and this is to be just sort of a small staff in service, and we're talking about it. And I say, you know, even though people don't speak in traditional means, it doesn't mean that you don't talk to them. And somebody said, well, what do you talk to them about? Okay, let's brainstorm. So we make up a list. The weather, okay? What went on at school today? What's happening around? All that kind of stuff. So fine. I go back a week later, and they'd actually taken the list that we'd brainstormed, put it on a computer with nice font, okay, under the title, Things to Talk to the Residents About, and they had it taped on the fridge, okay? So cool. Now I go in, I'm sitting down. I happened to get into the house before Laura, who was out in the backyard, came in. And as soon as she saw me, she made a beeline over to where I was sitting in the front room. And I got the treat out and I gave it to Laura and I was petting her. Now staff. And it was exactly the same staff that 2 weeks ago had said, what do you talk to the disabled about? Well, Laura turned around, ambled over to the staff, who began to pet her, and I am now quoting the staff. Oh, Laura Schmurry, the best dog in the world. Were you outside chasing those squirrels? Were you chasing them out the trees? Did you bark at those squirrels? Did you bark? Oh, those squirrels are very bad outside. And did the neighbors, did you let those squirrels, don't you come in our yard? Bark, 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 bark. She carried on a 15-minute conversation with another species, and it said to me, why do you talk to the disabled about? So cool. So it was actually kind of a nice teaching thing, okay? But the simple fact of the matter was that Laura was able to meet some of those needs. Why is it our job? Our job is facilitation, and we can still make sure that that devastation doesn't occur. However, like you, I was concerned about this as an issue, so we end up calling, and we called a man whose name is John Money, who's considered to be one of the world's leading expert in sex, great business card, and we started to talk to him about this as an issue, okay? Here we are, we're beginning to say that this is not the job of the staff, so what do we do instead for those people who are very, very disabled? And John said something odd. He said, you know, there is a particular animal behavior that all animal species perform for one another for free, but you and I have made a paid service. You all know what I'm talking about. Grooming, okay? So John was saying, John began his career in working with people who had significant learning handicaps, and he said, you know, I saw so many people with disabilities who are on our hair combing programs for 1,000 years, and they never ever do it real well. You know why? Because it's abstraction. They can't see it, okay? They're doing something abstract that requires a certain degree of abstraction. A lot of people with disabilities can't do abstraction. So fine, why do you teach them to groom each other? So we started with a young man and a young woman with a disability who showed interest in one another. Please don't make this sexual. That's really offensive. They just showed interest in each other as people. Okay, that is possible. They would sit, you know, close to one another in the front room, and when they went on van rides, they always liked to sit beside one another and so forth. So we taught him to brush her hair in the morning. Okay, and we taught her to brush his hair. Now years have now passed. They will sit on the couch in the front room and brush. He'll brush her hair for hours, and she's just laying back. Oh wow, oh wow! You should see the women, the staff in the group home are so envious of her, you know, because they can't get their husbands to touch them, and he's like brushing away and all. Every now and then, of course, she'll take the brush, or he'll take the brush and wham it at her to get his hair done, and she'll go whack, whack, and give the brush back. Now, I know a lot of relationships like that, okay, so please don't judge them. But the nice thing is, they haven't had one trauma of staff leaving since we did this, okay? So what I think we need to be doing is, let's get really creative. If it's not going to be us, let's not end there, okay? Well then who, well then what, well then how? This is where we should get at our most creative in terms of what we're doing, so that we're not into those spaces, because the women or the people that you are talking about who are more handicapped, they are more likely to be victimized by us. And every time we allow people access to the body of a person with a disability without guidelines, we are setting that person up to be victimized. And as far as I'm concerned, if we